everyone! If you enjoy the video, please leave a like and comment what type of content you would like to see next time. Also, only a small percentage of people that watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you end up liking the video, consider subscribing. Check out the Patreon in the video description for more stories by my team. Enjoy the video!
Just a minute. Abby's voice came from inside her flat. James was a few minutes early, but he was hoping she'd be ready to leave. They had a long drive ahead of them, and he wanted to get going. A few moments later, the door swung open, and he realized immediately what the delay must have been. She and her friends were going to the annual costume night, and their group theme, as he understood, was Alice in Wonderland. Abby stood in the doorway, posing, in her Queen of Hearts costume. "What do you think?" asked Abby. James knew how proud she was of this costume. Abby had always been into costume design since they met at university. She wanted, someday, to do it professionally, but until then, her creative outlet was making her own costumes, and the annual theme night was the biggest event of the year. She'd start planning months before, and once she had, it was hard to get her to talk about much else. Still, he certainly wouldn't have to be polite. Her outfit was, as far as James was concerned, incredible. The dress was a deep, rich red velvet at the front, or at least it looked like velvet, and continued in an equally luxurious-looking black at the sides. Her breasts were framed by the corset top, which was detailed with rhinestones and hearts and also made her waist a shape he barely recognized, flaring out into a skirt that stopped barely below her thighs with layers upon layers of dark red tulle below. The intricate puff sleeves flowed gracefully into a large, white and gold detailed collar that reached up almost to her ears. A small crown sat on the center of her head, a little taller than it was wide, and was adorned all the way around with rubies, fake, he assumed, and one large, heart-shaped one at the front. If he hadn't just heard her voice, he swore he would barely have recognized her, particularly since a matching red velvet and ruby-detailed carnival mask covered her eyes. On top of this, her hair, rather than the usual brown, was a bright, striking red. "I mean, there'll be makeup, obviously, and I didn't have time to put the boots on, or the gloves. But you get the idea, right?" Abby continued as James became aware that he'd been silent for a little too long. Sure, he'd been on nights out with Abby plenty of times, and even seen her in several of her custom-made costumes before. She always looked great, but he realized this was the first time he'd ever actually seen one of her outfits for the theme night, and this was on another level. She looked spectacular. "It's amazing," he finally managed, "and that's not even the finished product." "No, well, I was just making some final adjustments when you buzzed the flat, so I thought you deserved a preview since you won't get to see it otherwise. Anyway, come in, I'll get changed and we can go. Thanks again for driving me into town, this makes it so much easier." As he made his way into the flat and got comfortable on the sofa, he explained again that it really wasn't a problem since he was going anyway to pick his sister up from the airport. And besides, he hadn't seen her in a while, so a short diversion into the city center was well worth it to catch up with a friend. She was right though, he'd be on his way to the airport long before the night started, so he wouldn't get to see her or any of her friends in costume. Now that he'd seen the preview, he was starting to regret this. She continued her explanation from the other room. The night they were going to was apparently not just any theme party, it was quite well known in costume designing circles. People would come from far and wide in their best homemade costumes for the night, all to compete in the costume contest. Competition was fierce and the standard was exceptional. It was apparently well known that theater and film studio executives turned up and winners would, very occasionally, walk away with a job offer as well as the prize money. They were entering the group costume category, as they had for the past few years. This year, they were going all out to win. A few minutes later, Abby emerged with what must have been her costume, packed up into garment bags and plastic storage boxes. "Can you manage the rest of these?" she ordered, gesturing with her one free finger at a pile of more bags and boxes on the floor. "There's more?" he asked. "There's Becky's in there too," she replied. "She's at some work event and flying straight into the city, so I said we'd take her stuff too." Becky was a mutual friend, although James often tuned out of her and Abby's costume planning conversations, which were very frequent at this time of year. "I see why you wanted a lift," he responded. The journey into the city took just under a couple of hours. They soon realized that they hadn't seen each other much at all since James started seeing his girlfriend. She took up a lot of his time and probably would have been a little jealous of him hanging out with Abby anyway, even though she was an old friend. However, they had only just turned onto the main road when Abby learned that this girlfriend was now an ex-girlfriend. Of course, James hadn't thought to mention it. "When did this happen?" quizzed Abby, intently. "Last weekend. We broke up over dinner," he replied, trying to be very matter-of-fact about it, which Abby wasn't buying for a second. "Oh, mate, why didn't you say anything? Anyway, you're better off. Now we can get everyone together and have a proper night out again." She was right. He hadn't seen much of any of his friends. He didn't enjoy everything about their nights out drinking, but he had to admit, he did miss seeing everyone, and the rest of the drive reminded him why. Singing along to Abby's impeccable choice of road trip songs made the journey fly by. They had just parked at the hotel where Abby and her friends were staying when James realized he hadn't even thought to check his phone. Looking at it, he saw a string of messages and missed calls from his sister. It wasn't good news. Her flight had been cancelled. He glumly shared the news with Abby. "Oh, mate, you're not having a good week," she remarked. "Can she get another one? They're saying they're going to try and get her on the next one, but it's not until this evening." "Well, are you going to hang out here until then? Can't you tell her to get the train or something?" offered Abby. "Nah, she wouldn't have that, especially after she's been delayed. I'm telling you, you are way too nice, James. Anyway, why don't you hang out with us for a bit, if you're waiting around? You remember Lucy, right?" A girl about the same age as them had just stepped out of the hotel. The way she was enthusiastically running towards them was enough to jog his memory. Short, curvy and very, very bubbly. He didn't recall which party he'd met her at, but he certainly did remember that voice. "Abai," she yelled as she made her way over to the car. "And, James, right, Abby has told me all about you." "I literally just told you he was giving me a lift, Luce," Abby interjected. "Anyway, mind if James hangs out with us for a bit? His sister's flight has been cancelled." "Oh, that's rubbish. Sure. Is anyone else here yet?" "I just arrived," replied Lucy. "Nah, I'll text Steph and Jas and let them know we're here." Abby turned to James to explain. "Remember them? My roommates. Steph's our makeup star, and Jas is the one who first introduced us to the costume contest night. Oh, and Lucy's our one-girl hair department. Then it's just Becky. Her flight gets in later. Or at least I hope it does." And quote. Abby had just finished checking in and getting the keys for their rooms when they noticed Lucy had become uncharacteristically quiet. They turned to her and saw her staring intently at her phone, the color drained from her face. "Ah, Abby?" she uttered, meekly. "Luce, what is it?" inquired Abby. "I was just checking Becky's flight. What time was it supposed to get in? 1:30? Abby responded, hesitantly. "Yeah, I think so." "Why?" "It says here it's been diverted. All the flights are messed up." "What? Where to?" Abby asked urgently. "Doesn't say, but it doesn't look like much is landing at the moment." "That's all it says," Abby exclaimed. "I'm sure she's fine," offered Lucy. "I'm sure she is, but she's never going to make it for tonight, is she?" Abby retorted. Lucy continued to offer reassurance. "She might. We don't know where she's been diverted to yet. She could still make it." James piped up. "Couldn't the four of you still go?" Abby turned to him swiftly. "Not really, mate. She's with Alice. You can't have an Alice in Wonderland group theme without an Alice." James immediately regretted his words. Actually, he didn't really see why they couldn't have gone without an Alice. After all, the folk of Wonderland must have been going about their daily lives before Alice dropped in. Nonetheless, he thought it best to keep this thought to himself as Lucy attempted to save him. "Well, couldn't we switch and one of us wear her costume? I mean, you've got it, right?" Abby paused, but only briefly. The only one of us anywhere near Becky's size is me, and even then, it would take some adjusting. Plus, I've worked hard on mine too. James nodded in agreement, remembering how impressed he was by it a couple of hours ago. Do we know anyone else? Lucy continued, as Abby paused for longer, deep in thought. Not really. A couple of the girls from work, I guess, but they're miles away, and I don't know them that well anyway. Lucy replied thoughtfully, Steph and Jas might know someone. I'll text them. The three of them headed dejectedly up to the hotel rooms. It was a budget hotel, and the room made no effort to hide it. It was basic, but clean, save for a few scuff marks on the walls from an endless onslaught of rolling suitcases. Apart from the bed, a long desk along one wall, a chair, a TV, and a rail for hanging clothes, there was very little else. Some abstract framed artwork hung on the wall above the bed, and the rail was already loaded with the costumes in bags they had brought with boxes below. James sat in the single chair while Abby and Lucy perched on the end of the bed, all staring at their phones, searching and hoping in vain for news on the incoming flights. Hey guys, part 2 will be coming tomorrow. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. See you soon.